Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for turning up here on a Friday night. We are delighted to welcome you to the second event in the Rollercoaster series as part of this year's Bleach Festival. Thank you. I hope everyone's been getting along to Bleach and enjoying all the beautiful art and culture that our gorgeous city has to offer. Has everyone been going to stuff? Yes. Excellent. That's what we like to hear. So this evening we have a special treat for you. We have a panel of extremely knowledgeable, intelligent, fabulous people who are going to chat about all things women, mental health, sport, art, and all the ways they intersect. So it's going to be a really fascinating night and we hope that you enjoy it. This panel is actually curated by Everybody Now. Everybody Now is a group, national performance company. They're based on the Gold Coast and they create participatory, try saying that after 3 wines, participatory performance projects with, for and by communities. They very much have a community focus. Their work has been presented across Australia to over 46,000 people in 200 communities with participants aged 3 to 100 years young. Isn't that nice? Their work is driven by their purpose to move communities and their values of inclusion, quality, joy and integrity. Perhaps it's because of this that they have generated some pretty impressive stats around social impact, community cohesion and well-being. So 95% of the participants in Everybody Now's past projects have stated that they feel connected, empowered and valued, while outcomes with a bigger framework on mental health, well-being, movement and creativity exist as well. And to get a snapshot with this expert panel on where things are at in our communities when it comes to women's health and well-being, we're going to talk about policy, we're going to talk about social change and where the arts and sport fit into that. So it should be a really interesting evening. So I'm actually going to introduce our wonderful panel of wonderfully intelligent humans tonight who are going to share their wealth of expertise and knowledge with us. Directly to my left is Dr. Adele Pavlidis. She is a senior lecturer in sociology with the School of Humanities, Languages and Social Sciences at Griffith University. She's the author of 2 books. The first one is Sport, Gender and Power, The Rise of Roller Derby, which was published in 2016. And Feminism and Vital Politics of Depression and Recovery. So these were actually both published in conjunction with Simone Fullagar, who is sitting next to her. So they are long-time collaborators, friends, and both very, very interested in feminism, gender, sports, and all of those wonderful intersections. And Dr. Adele, just because, 2 books published isn't enough, is currently working on a 3rd one. A feminist perspective on the effective dynamics of contact sports. Sounds pretty cool to me. I'd be reading it. Page Turner. So she's published widely on a range of socio-cultural issues in sport and leisure with a focus on gender and power relations. Currently, her work focuses on sport as a key site of change in Australian society, which is something we're definitely going to explore, and an important context for changing and challenging attitudes towards women. In particular, she is interested in connecting social, cultural and health concepts with sport in the hope of creating more inclusive futures. Her Arc Decra Fellowship focused on the rise of participation and visibility of women in contact and collision sports in Australia. So please welcome Dr. Adele Pavlidis. You see, when you're dealing with people who have so many lists of qualifications, every single intro takes about 7 minutes. So you have to bear with us, but it's definitely worth saying because these humans are very impressive. So sitting next to Adele is Simone Fullagar. Simone is an interdisciplinary sociologist who has published widely on gender equity in sport, mental health, active communities and social wellbeing. With an interest in social and organisational change, her work contributes to thinking differently about inequalities. Simone also has a professional background in community service management for diverse populations. She's the chair of the Sport and Gender Equity Research Hub and is an active member and mentor in the Gender Equity Network and Centre for Social and Cultural Research. She has received funding to conduct qualitative research into leisure, sport and health-related areas, including women's recovery from depression, the socio-cultural context of youth suicide in rural and urban communities, and equine programs for at-risk youth. I love those equine programs, they're so cool. And she's also received the Shaw Mannell International Leisure Research Award for her contribution to feminist scholarship in leisure, sport and health from the University of Waterloo. Please welcome Simone Fullagar. And next we have the busiest person in the world, Emma Iwinska. She is the CEO of Women's Health and Equality Queensland, a not-for-profit organisation leading the way in gender equity and women's health in Queensland. Yeah. As well as that, she is also the president of Ending Violence Against Women Queensland, which is a peak body that brings together the women's health, refuge, domestic and sexual violence sectors. And just because that wasn't enough, she is also a member of the National Women's Health Network Board. Emma's work focuses on improving health outcomes and health equity for women and creating the structural and social change needed to stop men from perpetrating gendered violence. Emma works to create communities built upon equity, respect, the celebration of diversity and the recognition that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples are the custodians and knowledge holders of the lands, seas and skies where we all live, work and play. Emma loves working collaboratively and listening to the experts in women's lives, which of course are women. Please welcome Emma. Lastly, but most definitely not least, we have Beck Reid. Beck Reid is an Australian-based performer, producer. Yeah, whoop it up. Come on, let's get some cheerleading going. An Australian-based performer, producer, director, choreographer and engagement specialist. Beck encourages people to see their world in new ways through highly physical, participatory, practical, collaborative and celebratory actions. For 20 years, Beck has passionately worked in the space where professional artists and communities of interest meet, collaborating with communities and artists nationally and internationally. Together with Tristan Meacham, Beck leads All the Queen's Men and is a founding director of Everybody Now, the group that is hosting this panel tonight, with Kate Baggerson and Ian Pidd. In 2017-2018, Beck was a fellowship recipient from the Australian Council for the Arts, and she has continually served on arts boards and regularly mentors young and emerging artists formally and informally. Beck's true loves are Staffordshire Bull Terriers, Italian disco and dancing. Please welcome Beck. So as you can see, we have a wonderfully diverse, knowledgeable panel tonight who are going to talk to us about their specialties, give their opinions. No one has introduced me, so I'll do it myself. My name's Nat. I'm the editor of Blank magazine, Blank Street Press, which is a free street press that you will see around the place, especially if you come to Marketta, it's always here. Sort of like promoting Gold Coast culture, arts, music and environment, surf, lifestyle, all that kind of stuff. I've also just, in collaboration with the Blank team, created a new masthead called Nevertheless. And I'm just going to have a little plug here because I can. This is Nevertheless. It is a premium print product, a seasonal journal that celebrates incredible women doing extraordinary things and their persistence, passion and purpose. It's looking at the lives of everyday women that can actually inspire us. And it's definitely a labour of love, you know, we're not making tons of millions of dollars out of it, but we definitely feel very, very passionate about promoting women and everyday women who all day, every day are doing incredible things in their communities and in their own lives and overcoming adversity with strength and courage. So that's what Nevertheless Journal is all about. It's $21.95 if you want to pop onto Shopify or check out our social media. You are welcome to, and grab a copy for yourself. Oh. Now, so when it comes to women, I'm all over it. When it comes to mental health, I'm all over it from both sides of the equation. Sports, not so much. I realise that's shocking given how obviously athletic I am, but I definitely am less of a sporty type and more of a goes to catch the ball, misses it by 3 metres, falls down, breaks a bone that nobody's ever heard of type. So I'm not well versed in this, and apart from my obsessive interest in watching pro tennis, I was never interested in any sport whatsoever until I learned that roller derby was a thing. And roller derby's pretty cool. I mean, what's not to like? Spirit of inclusivity, badass chicks, really cool outfits, ripped fishnets, fierce competition. It's pretty awesome. But the thought of taking my lack of coordination and adding wheels and people trying to knock me over was just probably not the greatest idea. So I never actually joined, but I watched from afar. And roller humans and people who are brave enough to get on rollerblades and roller skate and do derby and all that kind of stuff, I find very, very inspiring. And I'm really, really excited to hear a little bit more about roller skating and these ladies' experiences with it. So I think we should get into it. What do you reckon? So tonight, I need a drink after all that. So tonight I'm going to start with Emma, actually. And we're going to talk a little bit more. I would like you to tell us a little bit more about your work as the CEO of your group and what actually is happening in terms of a women's health strategy in Queensland, because my understanding is we do not have one.
You're right. At the moment, we actually don't have a women's health strategy. So Queensland is one of the few states, the only state actually in Australia that actually doesn't have a women's health strategy. So my work at Women's Health and Equality Queensland, we have spent the last few years advocating very hard in this space. And we are very happy to announce that Queensland Health is currently working on one. And next year, Queensland will have, finally, a women's health strategy. Woohoo! So this all really came about pre-COVID. Pre-COVID, my organisation was running a health information line statewide to support women to access healthcare. And through that work, we decided to do a big survey. So we surveyed a lot of women across Queensland to find out where the issues were and what was going on with healthcare. And there were two very big themes that came out, and those themes were around access. So there was cost, a big cost issue with actually accessing healthcare, and the other big issue, being Queensland, was to do with geographic location. So if you live in the vast majority of Queensland, it's actually very difficult to access healthcare, down to even just a GP visit, let alone anything beyond that, like reproductive healthcare. So they were the two big themes that really came up from the survey that we conducted, and through that we also asked women what they wanted. What do they want in healthcare? So the really big themes that came through that was that they wanted not only to be able to access healthcare and for it to be free and universal, but they also wanted it to be trauma-informed. So they wanted access that gave them continuity of care, that was trauma-informed, and that was culturally safe for them as well. So we then, our next part of our process was to get a few allies in government and to bring together a lot of different organisations working in the women's health space. So we got together a lot of great community-based organisations like Respect Inc., who work with sex workers. And at the moment, if you didn't know, there's lots of advocacy happening to decriminalise sex work in Queensland, which is still currently a crime. We also got together great people like Sisters Inside, who support incarcerated women. And we brought a lot of really diverse voices to the table to really get a better picture of what was going on for often the most marginalised women in Queensland. And so we essentially wrote a health framework for the Queensland government. So we thought that was a pretty good way to get what we wanted. So we're really excited that there'll be some consultation that Queensland Health will lead later on this year. And then next year we will have a women's health strategy. So we're hoping that will go a long way to starting to improve access, cost and trauma-informed continuity of care for women.
Fantastic. That is such great news. Why do you think Queensland is so far behind, New South Wales, Victoria, or other states who have really been pushing ahead like this?
I think it's conservatism, to be honest. I think it's a long, long history of conservative governments and then making some progress and then going backwards and then making some progress again. So I think there's a real challenge with our just geographical size. I think that's actually massive, and we have such huge areas of sparsely populated areas, and that creates a dynamic within itself.
Can you tell me a little bit about your work with Ending Violence Against Women Queensland? What does a typical day look like there, and what are you actually doing?
That's it's an absolute joy, Ending Violence Against Women Queensland. So it brings together the women's health sector, the refuge sector, the sexual violence sector, and the domestic and family violence sector. So I have the absolute pleasure of working with an amazing bunch of CEOs predominantly who run organisations in that space. And our work is focused on big picture structural change, both at the state and the national level. Because what's often missed in maybe the stories we see in the news and things like that is actually looking at the structural piece in terms of why all those forms of violence occur, like why does gendered violence occur, and what are the drivers of gendered violence. And essentially it's gender inequality. So that's, people often think, oh, it's because someone was drinking. That's not true. That's not what causes gendered violence. It's to do with structural inequality. And so our work is really working with government at state and national level to try and drive that structural systems change so that we can have more equal, more inclusive societies and communities. So it's very strategic and very interesting work to do, and it's quite exciting work to be doing as well.
I understand that you operate under a vision that all women have safe and inclusive communities in which they are resourced to live their best lives, which I just love. Can you tell me, what does that mean to you, that phrase?
I actually think... that I'm going to talk personally, so I'm not going to talk on behalf of any of my organisations that I represent, but I actually think the older that I get, the more of a socialist I become, to be honest. Like, I actually think that we should be really rethinking what society looks like, that it should be about benefiting all people, and I think... that women are so great at working collaboratively, so great at thinking about how we care for all people in our communities. So for me, that would look like basically really a huge overhaul where we really place the wisdom of First Nations people at the heart of what we do. We really listen, we learn, we're humble in the way that we work, and I think that it's time that actually we let women and gender diverse people rule the world and create a better world.
I love that. So I'm going to throw this out to the rest of the panel with under that framework that all women have safe and inclusive communities in which they are resourced to live their best lives. If you could, have a miracle happen overnight, wake up and that happened, what would that look like in your view?
I'll say something. I was just thinking about gendered inequality and the drivers of violence, and it does connect to what you were saying, and the role of sport and movement in challenging some of those inequalities. So for a long time, women have been seen as fragile, passive, in need of perfection, in need of protection, in the private sphere, not out in the public sphere. And sport and movement is a space where women and gender diverse people can move their bodies, they can be tough, they can be aggressive, they can be seen as well. And so the world that I envision is a world where those qualities are not attached to women so strongly. So this idea of a woman as passive or weak or not capable of leadership or whatever, not intelligent, all of those things that we've kind of stuck onto the feminine are unstuck, and that there is just more room for everybody to be who they are and to not to get stuck with those gendered power dynamics in space.
Great.
Can I just add on to that, Adele, that when I think about that perfect place of the resource to be the best that we can all be, that what would be happening in that beautiful space also is that we are all safe to express ourselves the way we want to with abundance. Abundance in the best sense of the word, that we can practice our lives with abundance that doesn't actually take away from anybody. I love the idea that if you can live generously and with abundance, it's at no one else's detriment or deficit. You know, like nobody will lose if we all rise up, right? Nobody's going to lose anything. We're all going to gain. So I love the sense of being resourced to practice your life with abundance. It's been on my mind today.
Yeah, that's great. Simone, did you have anything to add to that?
I think just building on those points, I would probably start with thinking about what feminist knowledge can do to how we rethink the world and the ways in which we need to think about well-being and how we live our lives in terms of the economic system. We've known, feminist economists have been talking for decades about why women's unpaid labour is not valued when it underpins our whole economic system. So what would happen if women took themselves to market in a different way and we valued what they do and we valued care and reciprocity and relationship, and also our First Nations knowledges and practices and connections to country and environment? I mean, they're all pretty fundamental to our sustainable future. And that kind of future is one where people feel like they can belong and they're welcomed in terms of their diversity. So, you know, we have a lot of discussion now about gender diversity and diverse sexualities and cultures and ways of being in the world. And it's starting with that principle of diversity and then working our way out in terms of our systems and our laws and our cultures in workplaces and sporting clubs and our music environments, all those different contexts. So it's a kind of revolution in thinking as well as practice.
So since we're on the topic of diversity, which I think is great, you've all done a lot of work in your separate areas about, you know, being inclusive and diversity and stuff. And I'm interested to know, from a mental health perspective, if we're looking at it, what are some of the challenges faced by women and gender diverse people that are specific to them? I know, Adele, that you very strongly feel that mental health is gendered and that's not discussed enough. Would you like to address that?
Sure. Yeah. Wow. So the ways that mental health is gendered. I think there's lots to say. Where to start? I think something that Simone mentioned to me once is, you know, the number one reason that women go to the doctor is because they're exhausted. And I think that is very, very telling of all of this labour that women need to do. And it could be domestic labour, but even, you know, bodily labour as well, that kind of body work and emotional labour, all that mental labour. And then we're exhausted and wondering why we don't feel happier. And I think that is a key part of it. There's those pressures to be perfect. There's, you know, needing to fit into a certain mould, thinking, you know, as a teenage girl, like I thought that I needed a boyfriend to be happy, you know, those kind of things. And then being vulnerable to abuse as well. So many women have experienced sexual abuse or sexual harassment. I think it's like 1 in 2 women, I mean, it's 1 in 2 women at universities have experienced sexual harassment, and 1 in 3, I think, sexual abuse, it's a very high number. So, you know, I tell these things to my students and I say, you know, that means that in this room, we can definitely know that people have experienced sexual abuse. So, yeah, there are many reasons. And, yeah, They are mostly structural and social and cultural. And what really frustrates me is this emphasis on the individual, the biology of a person, the pathologizing of mental illness, rather than seeing it as a social cultural phenomena that is entangled, with biology as well. So that's definitely something that I get very frustrated about. I think that women are treated differently all along the mental health pathways, even when it comes to hospitalizations, with doctors. We know that for women with endometriosis, they're not, their pain is not taken as seriously. They're not listened to. So I could go on if you want me to. What else would you like to know?
No, I think that's really good, and I think that's definitely, exhaustion is sort of an overarching issue that comes with a whole set of other issues as well. And I've heard horror stories of women just being diagnosed as, oh, it's just period pain, or it's just, and then ending up going through half a dozen doctors before they're finally taken seriously. And yeah, it definitely feels like there are more challenges that women have to face medically. I think you've covered that really well. Beck, you deal with a lot of LGBTQIA+ youth and elders and trans humans. Can you please talk to us about some of the mental health challenges there?
Yeah, definitely. From the last 7 years with my wife, Tristan, from All the Queensmen, we've been running what we call LGBTIQAP+ Elders Dance Club, and it's exactly what it says it is. It's a Sunday afternoon tea dance. Largely people over 65 who want to identify somewhere in that lovely alphabet, the alphabet soup they call it, which is great, and I'm an ally in that space, and I actually have to be very clear that I'm an ally in that space, which is great learning for me. But what I've noticed that's a lovely project because it's had a long game. We're 7 years in now, so we're starting to understand maybe a pattern, or two things are happening. Younger people are coming because they are desperate to connect with what they are citing as their elders. They want to connect with their community and legacy and lineage, and that's great to see particularly younger LGBTIQAP+ people like 35 and under, and they just say, I just want to sit with John, who's 89, and have a big old chat about being a 78er and what it was like, and which is great. The other thing that's happening is more and more older trans people are coming to Dance Club, and we're noticing they have very specific, particular, nuanced mental health challenges. And my job, as a person whose life is about movement and being very upfront about that, my identity is moving, my job is really quickly to make safe space, almost as instantaneously as I can. That lovely older transgender person comes to the door, and I'll just share a quick gorgeous story, and they just do this, and they just look in, and oh no, it's not for me. And I can share her name. Robin did that for 3 Sundays in a row. She just peeked in and went, I just can't do it. So finally I went to the door on the 4th Sunday and said, hi Robin, I'm Beck. Can I hold your hand? That was the first time Robin had physical contact in 6 months. And we developed this beautiful ritual. Robin is a bus driver, and only at Dance Club is Robin the Robin that she wants to be. So we developed a little ritual around Robin's mental health and building her confidence over time, and that was that she would come to the door and give me a little, I'm here. And we'd go round the back. It's a big town hall, big colonial space. Whoa, it's a heavy space. And we'd go round the back, and we'd put on our lipstick together, because Robin couldn't afford lipstick. That's the other thing about access and assuming identities. But as a trans woman, she couldn't afford lipstick, and that was a huge part of how she wanted to express herself. So we'd put on our lipstick together. And we'd take our time, and that was our check-in mental health moment. I realised that was the place that I could do that. And then we walked back around, and then we would intentionally fling the doors open and be like, Robin's here! And everyone would make a big, and that took months to develop, but it was a great learning for me as an ally about the mental health of a very particular older transgender person who doesn't have access to all the things that we take for granted in many ways, and the importance of just taking baby steps, from someone who just had the courage on a Sunday afternoon to poke their head in a doorway. Anyway, I wanted to share that story because it's a beautiful story, actually, and Robin comes to every single dance club.
That's great. That's lovely.
Right.
Simone, I understand is it recently you've started working with women living with a disability? Would you like to address any mental health issues there?
I have worked with women with disabilities and a range of self-identified mental health conditions for a long time, on and off. And in terms of our research, I think this is a really important area to be thinking about in terms of what disability means, because when we start thinking about it critically, we start to unpack all the categorisation of our human experience that subjects women to particular forms of treatment or classification or identification, and of course our services relate to that. So, but when we dig deeper into the stories, I think just as Beck has talked about, there's stories of struggling with identity, of embodied experience and feeling included, and sport and leisure are spaces where, it's not easy to access. Our world is not all universally designed, nor are spaces thought about in terms of the emotional connection and belonging that women need. And in relation to violence, we know women with disabilities experience higher rates of violence as well. So when we, it brings me back to thinking about how we design our spaces, whether that's gyms or sport clubs or health centres or dance halls, how are we thinking about that space in terms of belonging and being welcoming and also reflecting diverse bodies as we experience it in the world. And the kind of mental health and feminist dimension to that is about really questioning the categorisation of individuals and how that can limit self-expression and the way in which we value people, because we have quite narrow ways of valuing individuals in terms of what they can't do rather than what they can do. And I think when we start to look at the kinds of socialisation experiences we have through school into sport, the most common thing I hear in my research with a variety of women is that PE was usually a site of torture rather than fun and pleasure. So even in what we do in schools is so important, and that can be for older women years later. What did I learn about my body in PE? Oh, well, I wanted to escape. So, how can we even think about introducing different ideas about movement that's not necessarily about competition, it's not necessarily about skill acquisition, it's about a physical literacy, as we talk in policy today, that's about enjoyment, connection, different values that mean that we're all different kinds of bodies and people can experience places and connections in their own way.
Can I give a great little example to that, Simone? I'll be quick. I'm going to tell all the good coalface stories. There's a school I work with in far western Melbourne. It's a very poor part of the city, the Western English Language School, and it's the school that receives the new migrant asylum seeker children. They don't do PE for all the reasons that Simone was talking about. And they never use the word competition, which is great. Instead of PE, on Fridays, we get together and we do a lot of hip-hop together. And it's so fun. Big inclusive circles, all in. And it's working, and they've committed to it now, for the last 15 years, because they get the long game of embodying, giving opportunities, particularly for young women. A lot of the students who come are from Iran and Afghanistan, and being in your body and historically is a very different story, so they're seeing how that's playing out. That by the time those students graduate, then they can decide if they want to go and join the soccer team or however they want to access sport. But it's actually through dancing and doing hip-hop every Friday that they've been empowered, which is so nice to see that happen and see a school commit to that over a long time. Yeah. It's working. What you're saying is working.
And I think it's probably a great point to bring up now the resurgence of roller skating, because it's fun movement, it's music related, it's social, and it's just playful. And so would anyone like to talk about the rise of roller skating over the COVID period? And
I will.
So I've been I've been researching roller skating and roller derby now for over a decade, which is strange to say. So I did my PhD about roller derby, and that was in 2010, 2011, and I have a job. So that's my one-liner. And that's when a bit of a revival of roller skating, I think, began. So, people were buying roller skates. They started, manufacturing them again because it was such a niche activity before then. So from then it started to grow. I won't tell you the entire story of roller derby, but then COVID lockdown happened, and at that stage there was another revival of more recreational roller skating. So in places like Queensland and Victoria and all over the world, actually, people found that roller skating was something they could do while they were in lockdown. So they could go online, buy a pair of roller skates and just go to a netball court or any path and skate. And so that's what they did. And then people started to organise a little bit, create a Facebook group or a meetup and meet up with other people and, make friends and make skate friends and learn tricks. And since then, there has just been a real explosion. And what I love about it is that it really is women at the fore, as with roller derby as well. But even in the roller skate community, it's so inclusive. It's unlike, say, other skate sports like skateboarding, they have a lot to do in terms of being inclusive. It's being very exclusive, very masculine, blokey. But roller skating it's fun and it's playful, and the kind of men that are involved are also usually like that. So, yeah, it's really fun, and people talk about all the mental health benefits, and, they talk about it as a way for them to reinvent themselves. So, a person who just has a regular job on the weekends is a disco queen, or, can go and jump off a ramp and skate, and, you can fulfill your imagination in a way. And also that it's quite, it's not that easy. So, of course, lots of people buy roller skates and start skating. But, I mean, myself included, I wish I was better. But I don't have enough time. But I think that there is an element that it's actually quite hard to be a really good roller skater. I'm not a really good roller skater. I'm just, average. But to be a really good roller skater is really hard, and you admire those people that are really good. It's like, wow, look at how they use their body. Far out. It's so cool. And I think that, it becomes just part of a daily practice of living and moving and confidence. Yeah.
Fantastic. I'm so jealous of people who can roller skate. One day, probably break a hip though.
Pads, pants with pads, I own them.
I need a full sumo suit, I think. So, Beck, talk to me about the creation of this event in that context.
Yes. Can I, just before I do that, can I pick up on one thing that Adele inspired me to think about was risk. When you put on a pair of skates, you have, all of a sudden, there's a relationship to risk, an internal one and an external one. And what I have loved, which I'll circle back to, is as we start to learn about everything on wheels, the risk that offers, entices, presents, is similar to art making. It's really risky, and the payoff ultimately can be fantastic. So this whole week, everybody now, and Kate and Ian are here in the room, which is great. We've come together with a whole bunch of local singer-songwriters and very accomplished musicians, and we've spent the whole week exploring story, everybody now, real people, real stories. So stories, skate and song. So over the week, we've been meeting with lots of different people from the skating spectrum, the roller derby team, East Coast Derby, some of them are here tonight as well, which is great, and a whole bunch of people who skate for different reasons. That Adele painted that picture so beautifully. We've asked them to share their stories, their relationships to skate, and then sometimes publicly with them, the musicians and singer-songwriters have written music and song then and there, inspired by those stories, and we've also taken those stories away and been crafting them up. so that on Sunday, back here in this space, we're going to share all the songs that have been inspired by the local skaters on the Gold Coast, and interweave some choreography we've also been playing with around that as well, in the spirit of a week-long residency, a creative development that's about being in resident here during the Bleach Festival, but as a lovely way for everybody now to introduce itself to the skating community and invite story and say, hey, do you want to make a thing together? Should we do this together? That makes room for everyone, which is really glorious. And the hope is that it will land somewhere in 2023, but we're going to take our sweet, sweet time to learn and understand and really hear the stories and craft up a beautiful piece of art down the track, which is pretty fun, really fun. So the risk of being on wheels and the risk of making art has been really delightful to be watching those two things rolling alongside each other this week. Yeah.
And what time on Sunday can people come along and see this?
Back here, 2 till 4. It's sort of the ultimate sharing of the roller coaster residency, and you'll hear really incredible musicians share the magic. And I'm hoping some of the skaters in the room, you are literally going to hear some words that you shared with us, crafted back into exquisite music, and also be a great chance to share with you some of the skaters that we've asked to come in to share their physical expertise. They are experts in their skating lives, and share some choreographic ideas, 2 till 4. And then we'll have a skate, right? We'll play some tunes and have a skate and a chat. Never know who you might meet on the wheels. All wheels matter. That's our little hashtag, all wheels matter. We've been learning.
What a great event. That sounds so fun. I'd actually like to talk a little bit about roller derby now specifically, because it's such a fascinating sport, and it's really its own thing with its own culture and its own lingo and its own sort of secret handshakes, and I just love it. And while we're on the subject of wellbeing, I know that, Emma, you have delved quite a bit into roller derby and wellbeing, and I'm just wondering what you've learned in that area that is really interesting or maybe surprising to you.
I think with women's wellbeing, one of the key things that roller derby does that's highly beneficial is firstly the movement, because we know that for mental health, movement is very effective. We know all the research says it's as good as antidepressants, if not better, in terms of your mental health and your mental wellbeing. So it does that. It also has connection. And I think particularly post-COVID, just how important that connection is. And then there's that other piece around being valued, building your self-confidence, and what that does long-term for your sense of identity.
And Adele and Simone, in your work, have you found the same? Is there a more sort of aggressive side to things as an outlet for, frustration and energy and all that kind of stuff, competitive spirit?
I definitely found that I think I interviewed 80 women in roller derby, and I spent like hundreds of hours hanging out and skating at the time. And so one of the chapters in our book is about this kind of healing potential of the hard aggression of roller derby, that a space that is very hard, it's very tricky, and it's also can be aggressive in a way, was so healing and therapeutic for so many women, that it can be a space where they don't have to be caring, that was so important to them, but also that it was about other women and around other women. The fact that it wasn't so uniform like other sports, some sports it's like you have to wear a certain skirt and a certain, colour, and the women, they all loved that they could express themselves, so they could be active while being themselves. So that was really important as well. And they could identify themselves as different, as unique. The roller derby identity is very strong. It's, it means a lot to the people who are in roller derby. To be a derby girl is a really important part of some people's identity in roller derby, and I think that's important for well-being, to have belonging, we talked about earlier. So.
Just to add a couple of points to that, I think what interests me about sports spaces, and particularly DIY sports spaces and women's sports spaces and gender-inclusive sports spaces, is not the winning and losing. It's all about the kind of space to articulate what bodies and beings can become, and to push the boundaries of our gender normativity, because we don't really know what women's bodies are capable of doing yet. It's only been in the last few years that women have been beating men in ultramarathon races, when we always thought historically that women were weak and fragile and, biologically inferior. So, we're blowing those norms out of the water, and we're having much more interesting conversations about what bodies can do and what kind of sport is interesting and engaging, and that's a big shift, because it is a really conservative space. And as we keep seeing with all the transgender debate going on, it's not sport is not necessarily an open, inclusive space. It's empowering and it's highly constraining. And that's what makes it an interesting sociological space for pushing the boundaries and articulating change. And we need to, keep having those public conversations so sport moves along. And I think Derby is a classic example of how that feminist ethos of get out there and challenge and do it yourself, change the system rather than fit in with it, is influencing sport more broadly, and also music and popular culture and third wave feminism and digital cultures, and all of that really is part of it. So it creates a space where women can be more than just good girls, they're told to be, and to be aggressive and fast and use your body in ways that show strength and stamina. Means that we have a more rounded, multiple notion of what women can do, rather than these kind of very narrowly defined parameters, which are really not much fun for anyone.
Yeah. Woo!
Yeah.
I find the intersections between sport and art and movement and dance very interesting. There's still that that sense of community, that sense of belonging, that sort of thing that you're all doing and achieving together and growing together. I'm interested, Beck, in what you think about maybe applying that feminist lens of, destroying gender norms in terms of artistic movement, and how you incorporate that into your work.
Yeah, I think it's happening more and more, which is great. At a personal level, on a daily basis, if I'm in the making space on the floor, I am always thinking about modelling behaviour, because if I'm working with a young girl in a remote Indigenous community, which I will be next week, I'm thinking about how can I demonstrate without speaking that she has every right to claim the space she wants to claim, because I have too, and we can do that together. So I'm just constantly thinking about modelling behaviour, if that makes sense. And I think there's a huge responsibility as an ally as well, particularly in the trans space, to be mindful of the space you take up and how you make space for others. And I think art can do that really well. Art making, we can do that so well. We're really good at going into conversations that are tricky, but we can do it respectfully and in the spirit of let's get to somewhere that didn't exist before we met. Let's make something new, and pushing the structures that you were talking about, Simone, which is so great. So I'm constantly thinking about, I'm looking at this table in front of me, these gorgeous young skaters that I met on Wednesday, who are now here talking about feminism, so great. And I'm thinking about my responsibility to them. I'm 43. I'm looking at them going, my job is to make space for you. That's absolutely my job. While I was on the phone this morning to my 87-year-old mentor going, Lorna, I don't know what to talk about. Right? And her job is to look after me. So that constant, how you model your behaviour, if that makes sense. I'm not really sure what I just said. It's about you. That's what I meant. It's about you.
I think sport should be more like art. It should think of itself more creatively, rather than in this, what Simone said, winners and losers. In our work, I think we really try to bring that across, that sport is so much more than competition. It is about collaboration and belonging and transformation at many levels. So, yeah, I think sport could really do with some art lessons.
Right.
Do you think there's anything inherently wrong with being competitive?
No. Going to win tomorrow, the hockey semi-finals. No, it's fun because sport is fun, but winning is funner. But I'll still have a good time because I'm determined for it to be about fun, not about winning. So I'm not going to be upset if I lose, but I will be more happy if I win.
So healthy.
It's true.
So I'm curious about the longevity of people in sport and in roller derby particularly. You know, it's a fairly intense physical activity, and your experiences and working at the three panellists here who have done all of that. What is your experience? What is the sort of, you know, average age that people get into it, average age that people stop? You know, what happens after roller derby too?
I'm glad you asked. So I recently published an article called Troubled Derby Subjectivities, and research is an excellent career if anybody is interested. And where I interviewed women, or I didn't ask for women, I just put a call out for people who used to be involved in derby, because I was interested in those dynamics of leaving and learning from roller derby. So roller derby did what all other sports wanted in attracting more women to get active. So there's a lot of government campaigns, you know, move your body, change her game, whatever. So, you know, the government invests a lot, and roller derby was able to do that. All of a sudden you had hundreds of women, thousands, all around Australia and around the world joining roller derby leagues and starting skating and being active. But a lot of those leagues folded. They weren't sustainable because it is all DIY. It's a lot of energy and effort to sustain all of this. So I was really interested to learn what attracted people and then what happened when they left. And what I learnt from those interviews and all my previous research was that it was a non-linear journey. You know, it wasn't just come in and get out. You know, it was like everything in life, complicated. And so, you know, what attracted people in the first place was an opportunity to be with other women. They talked about how derby set their life on fire. They talked about how they wanted to be around more women at the time, and they loved the feminist ethos and all of that stuff about it. But then as they moved through the sport, things changed. You know, at the beginning you were talking about, you know, I love roller derby, it's got fishnet stockings and all these things. Well, some of people in roller derby are saying that's not us. You know, we are a sport. We want to be taken seriously. We want to be a legitimate sport. So there are tensions within roller derby and that are really important to acknowledge. There is no utopia. And so as things changed, you know, people felt that, you know, it was time to move on. Also the DIY nature, having to step up and be president of a league and deal with complaints, deal with bullying and deal with all these things, sometimes for the first time in their lives. And often they'll be quite young, having to deal with a whole league and all the politics that go with it, you know. So there's just, yeah, it's such a rich environment. But what I love about roller derby, and I think one of the things that I've really just really respected and why I'll always see it as a trailblazing sport in society, is how they have addressed racism and transphobia in their sport, and the strong stances that they've made to try and listen to their communities, to be inclusive. When the Black Lives Matters riots were happening, or protests were happening in the United States, you know, they tried to say some words. They were spoken back to by their community members, and then they tried again. You know, it was a conversation. It wasn't just like a statement coming from a professional body. And yeah, I love that they're always open to grow and change, even though they do have that competitive element that they want to pursue.
What a thorough response. That's impressive. Come on.
Great. Yeah.
No, that's great. And Emma, do you have anything you'd like to add to that? No. I guess my thoughts are, you were talking about how important that identity is, that sense of belonging and all that kind of stuff. What happens when that identity is taken away? Is there a period of transition? If the benefits, mental health benefits of the group no longer exist, does mental health lapse? What have you noticed patterns of in your interviews?
What I guess there was that mental health is not a destination. It's a journey. It's not a static thing. It is about movement. It's the words that we have to describe it are a bit weird. Mental health, mental, but it's embodied as well. How we feel. So sometimes there was relief in leaving roller derby. There was grief. There was a lot of grief. Why couldn't I make it work? Why was it like that? But by the time they reached out to me to volunteer, they had found other things in their life and they appreciated what roller derby had brought to them, what it done for them. And I think that it had provided them with a space for them to embody this notion of being troubled. And by troubled, I don't mean, anything bad, but just that risk. They got the opportunity to really embody that sense of risk and danger and excitement, and that carried through into the rest of their lives.
So I think, we've canvassed definitely the issues, mental health issues facing women and gender diverse folks, and how to look at, how sport and art can interact to improve mental health outcomes. But I think I'd really like to look at prevention now. And Emma, that's something that you deal quite a lot with. Can you talk to us about, what does prevention look like? What are the kind of things that are in place? What are the kind of things that need to be in place? Where does the work need to happen?
In terms of mental health?
Yeah, we can talk about mental health and also in gender equality, because that leads to violence and all sorts of other issues.
Yep. They're quite interlinked. So we know for women aged 18 to 44, their biggest health risk factor is gender-based violence. So that has the biggest impact on their life, and then there's a lot of follow-on effects in terms of mental well-being. So what needs to happen? Oh, that's such a good question. We actually need to start investing in the primary prevention of violence. And so that's whole of community. The only way that we can do primary prevention of violence is to get the whole community on board, and we need the government to invest a lot of money. At the moment, I think gender-based violence costs Australia about $26 billion per year. In Queensland, we probably spend... we actually don't even have a primary prevention of violence plan in Queensland yet. But I'm working on that one too. So primary prevention of violence, at the moment, there's sort of 3 stages. We've got the preventing it before it occurs. So that's the work that we're really invested in. You have early intervention where you can see it's happening, or you might have a high-risk group and you try and intervene. And then you've got the recovery side, which is police response, getting people to refuge, and the recovery work that you do. So at the moment, the government puts all its money into the recovery end. So what we're trying to advocate for at the moment is to say, if it's costing us $26 billion, let's put 26 billion, let's just go big. Let's put 26 billion into prevention. And what that would look like is doing having pay equity, having equal opportunities for all people of all identities to do the same things. It would be a really big piece around social messaging. It'd be workplaces, getting into the homes, having really strong messages into the homes, making sure that respectful relationship education is mandated to be taught in all schools. In Queensland at the moment, it is being rolled out. but it's still opt-in. So schools can still choose whether they deliver it or not. So we need to move away from that and make sure that it's starting in kindergarten, that kids from kindergarten, we're breaking down sort of gender stereotypes in kindergarten. So we know that having rigid gender norms is a really big driver of gender-based violence. We know that condoning violence against women is a really big driver. We know that having male peer relationships that are based around aggression and degrading women is another really big driver, which is often very entrenched in sport. So these are the drivers that we really need to start unpacking. So it's primary prevention of violence is getting into the spaces where we work, which there's progress is being made there, where we play. So this is sport community. And then when we live in the homes, and this is things like making sure that there's equal parenting going on in homes and equal responsibility for all the things that happen in a home. So that's the last bastion that's very difficult and very challenging to shift, and that's where the research says we're not getting much traction, is the home and the play spaces. But we're slowly getting better in work. But did you know that we're almost at the end of August, and the end of August is Equal Pay Day? So if men stop working at June 30, women have to work through till the end of August every year to make the same amount of money. So it's pretty terrible. I think last year it was August 31st, and I haven't actually they haven't released the date yet, I think, for this year, what Equal Pay Day will be. So we get to work an extra 2 months every year to make the same amount of money. So this is what primary prevention of violence is, breaking all those things down so that we all have safe, inclusive communities for all people.
I noticed that social media wasn't one of those pillars, or does that fall under home? I'm just thinking of that Andrew Tate dickhead that's been everywhere lately, and other influencers like that, these, pickup artists and vocal misogynists who are getting hordes of young men to follow them online.
Yeah, it's very terrible. And I think there is a responsibility for those spaces to actually be shutting down those conversations that are harmful. And it's hate speech. That is hate speech, the things that are being discussed by people like Tate. And I absolutely think that there's a responsibility for those platforms to shut that down, because that directly drives sexual assault.
And I feel like there's this sort of sense of, got to be careful what I say here, but kind of like a sense of disenfranchisement in young white cis men today who are looking for something to blame, feminists or whatever, for what they feel is, I guess, a mass turning against them. They feel quite persecuted. And then people like your Andrew Tates come out with all this rhetoric, and they're kind of latching onto it as an outlet for their anger and disappointment. So what do you think would be a solution in the education space, like a sort of maybe a specific example of how we can teach young men that their worth is not dependent on this kind of thing, and that, this is actually going to get them nowhere in the long run?
Yeah, you actually need to start young, and I think that's the thing, that we actually don't start those consent conversations if they actually occur at all, because they don't always occur for young people, but we're not starting them until too late. We're starting them in high school, and often not early high school, maybe middle high school, that we're starting to have those conversations with young people. So that work needs to start as early as possible and in age-appropriate ways, but that's really the key thing. And there's great examples of how that's been done, and using sort of whole-of-school frameworks where you actually have all the teachers and the people who work in the tuck shop and the cleaners and the school community all behind doing whole-of-community change pieces around what respectful relationships are, and breaking down sort of rigid gender roles in that space. And it works. It's one of the things that the UN says is the most effective way to end violence against women and children. is working with young people. So we really need that sort of long-term. It's big picture and it's long-term, and so I think that's why sometimes there's some reluctance from government to invest in it, because we're looking at 10-year, 20-year investments.
Do you feel hopeful for the future?
Always. I'm an eternal optimist.
And I'd love to know everyone else's answer to that question. Do you feel hopeful for the future in terms of gender equality? And
I've been around for a while, so and I've been a feminist for a long time, so I feel hopeful and optimistic because change is always possible, and we need to look for the cracks in the systems and structures. They will persist otherwise. I feel like I'm talking about similar issues but in a different context. But I'm always hopeful because power is never absolute, and there's always ways to push back and ways to explore other knowledges and practices. And the key thing, I think, is finding your alliances and collaborators. We can't do this by ourselves. The weight of it is way too much. And there is a pleasure in feminist resistance and collaboration. So we should enjoy the politicisation of change in all our spaces and bring people with us, including those young men who feel disenfranchised, because patriarchy is bad for men too. That's the message we need to communicate as well.
yeah.
This isn't feminist knowledge, but it is good. So, we have a feminist colleague who is a boxer and an academic, and every Tuesday she posts Tupac Tuesday, and which I love because I love Tupac. And so, Tupac says everything changes and things will never be the same. So that's what I tell my students. Everything changes. It's always going to change. And the other thing that he says is that, I might not be the one to make the change, to make something big, but I'm going to be the one who helps spark that change, who helps spark that brain to do something, that if I keep talking about it, somebody, is going to do something. So, it's hard. It's really slow work, writing journal articles. Like, it's slow and then nobody reads them, even though they're awesome. So it's hard to see how change is, Simone, how change is going to happen, but to have outlets like this and, really great ways to try and talk about these things creatively and that engage all different people is really important. And I have 2 sons and I am working very hard on them. And it's, it's hard work because they ask me, what about boys? You're always talking about women. You don't even care about us. And I'm like, that is how Andrew Tate probably feels, like my 9-year-old. Hopefully, creating change in any little way that I can.
Beck, would you like to wrap us up?
I am super hopeful. I'm very, very hopeful because what you were saying, Adele, about sparking change in others, I personally have the great privilege of doing that my whole professional life. That's absolutely what's driving me every day. And the more I spend time with young people and hear how they're speaking, I'm feeling like, we're getting somewhere with the long game that we've been investing in, which is thrilling. They are all over it, and I'm so excited about that. And then I thought today I saw this very simple thing that I think encapsulates it all for me. Nothing happens until something moves.
I think that's a fantastic note to end on. Please thank our panel. Incredible. I believe we have some gifts for our guests.
Nevertheless merch.
Yes. It's a magazine and a tote. Also available on Shopify, funnily enough. Oh, they're beautiful.
Big thanks to our fantastic facilitator, Nat, as well. Please give it up. and all things nevertheless.
We'd also like to say thank you to you for turning up here on a Friday night to listen to a talk, and we hope you've certainly taken something out of it. I know I've taken a lot out of it, and I'm probably going to struggle to sleep tonight because my brain's going to be whirring. The team at the venue here, Marketta, they're just fabulous, and we love Marketta, so thank you so much. I also need to thank the funding partners and supporters. So everybody now is supported by the Queensland Government through Arts Queensland, part of the Department of Communities, Housing and Digital Economy, the City of Gold Coast, and proudly a home company at Hotter, Home of the Arts. Roller Coaster has been supported by Bleach Festival, the Restart Investment to Sustain and Expand Fund, RISE, I should just sort of said RISE, and Griffith University, Women's Health and Equality Queensland, and East Coast Derby Dolls. The artists and songwriters from Roller Coaster who are here tonight, we can't wait to hear what's going on Sunday. Thank you for turning up. And you'll be able to see, as Beck mentioned, the Fruits of Everybody's Now residency this Sunday here at Marketta for a closing party featuring a showcase of the new music that has been written and composed in 7 days, plus special guests, skating workshops, a bar, food, craft and live music. So you can check out the Bleach and Everybody Now team who are here. You can see them in their shirts, the Everybody Now team, if you want more info on that one. So please stick around, keep this conversation going. Peer pressure is going to crank up the tunes over there, and we're going to clear the tables, and anyone with skates can come along and skate, and anyone without skates can have a boogie. So please hang out with us, and thank you very much.